Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. So, in the fourth chapter of my book, I go over a topic which is a bit less concise than the previous chapters of the book. The previous chapters were all about one specific idea, however this chapter is more about a more general tying together of some interesting ideas surrounding hierarchies, and the following chapters, or the following one chapter, the chapter 5, is also a similar sort of idea. This chapter is more about the errors when it comes to our interpersonal relationships with hierarchies and how we perceive those above and below us, right? It's more us within the hierarchy. This is what this one's about. And then the next chapter will be about us standing outside of the hierarchy and taking a look at it in its totality, right? Because obviously we'll get a better view of the hierarchy looking at it from this sort of lens. But this is, in this chapter, we talk about the hierarchy in relation to ourselves. So the first thing I talk about is gratitude. So gratitude is a fairly interesting idea when it comes to non-interpersonal gratitude, not like you being grateful to someone else for doing something for you. You more generally being grateful for where you stand in society, for the stuff you have, for your house, for your car, for your family, for your friends, whatever it might be. This idea of gratitude is effectively saying, so let's say you say, I'm happy that I have my house. Effectively what you're saying, to rephrase it a bit, would be, I am happy that I'm not homeless, right? Which is, again, a fair assessment. It's good to be happy about these things, right? However, in order for your happiness to exist, there has to be that which is homeless. So if you're happy about having a house, that happiness is derived from the fact that there exist those without houses, right? If everybody has something, then it really isn't very, then you'll never feel happiness about having that thing. If everybody else had it, then you won't feel happiness about having it, if that makes sense. So like, you don't feel happiness for like your hands or your toes or your fingers or whatever it might be until you see somebody who doesn't have these sorts of things, and then you get reminded, oh, I should be grateful for these sorts of things. But that happiness is derived from the existence of that person who doesn't have hands or toes or whatever the example was. Your happiness is derived from the person in the negative state. So you effectively are feeling happy that this negative state exists, that you've perceived it, and now you are not in it. You can perceive that you aren't in it. The joy is derived from the negative, right? And this is the way that gratitude could be perceived in a negative sort of light, that being grateful for stuff is actually a malevolent sort of emotion, almost Schadenfreude-esque. I call it combustible envy because it's a bit different than Schadenfreude. So I go on to talk about Schadenfreude and how it affects us, and how we mainly feel Schadenfreude for those who are distant enough from us, who we see as not being ourselves. For example, if there was two political parties and you supported one, you wouldn't feel Schadenfreude if your political candidate lost something or had some sort of misfortune happen to them. However, you would feel Schadenfreude if that happened to the enemy political candidate. If you don't know what Schadenfreude is, it's effectively pleasure gained from the misfortune of others, right? It only happens in specific circumstances, though. So the next part of the chapter would be the big idea which I want to talk about is pain and boredom. So when we speak of pain and boredom and pleasure, I present the ideas of Steven Pinker. So Steven Pinker is saying the world is getting better because there's less pain in the world. However, I don't think this is a logical conclusion to come to, because less pain in the world could mean that there is more boredom, not necessarily more pleasure. And a lot of the times, boredom is seen as being more aversive to most people than pain. There was a study done where people were very bored, and they had the option to shock themselves in order to just to do something, and a fair amount of these people shocked themselves just to get away from this boredom. So I don't think the point that life is getting less painful is exactly conducive to the idea that life is more pleasurable. However, even if we were to assume that this was the case, it doesn't really impact necessarily directly how we see the world. News, media, all of these sorts of outlets constantly are showing us that the world is getting worse and worse and worse and worse, at the same time showing us that there exist people who are many orders of magnitude better than us in like loads of different fields, right? And because of this, we feel inferior, and we also feel scared or negative feelings about the world, right? Because we are being showed how many people are in a worse plight than us, how bad the world is, and how much better other people are than ourselves. So we're getting like the full brunt of this negativity from what we perceive. So even if we were to assume, for example, that the world is getting more pleasurable, it's not obvious that this pleasurable that we would be shown this, that we would know this, and that the existence of the world being a better place would be conducive in any way to our internal feelings about how the world actually is, because the world is a very big place and we have to see it through a very refined medium, and often that refined medium is the media, and in order for the media to stay afloat, they have to get a lot of clicks, get money, and the main thing which drives this monetary incentive is the negative media, or celebrities effectively. And those are the two things which drive the most media, drive the most money in media, and both of these are examples of stuff which we, or events and people which oftentimes make us feel negative about ourselves, right? So the world getting better is not a conducive factor in and of itself, if that makes sense. Then the last thing I talk about in this chapter is the idea of the love of losers. So Jordan Peterson spoke about something which was very weird and interesting to me. So when he was talking about winners and losers, he said that he effectively feels loserdom or loss is necessary in order for us to feel, in order for us to have the benefits of the winner. The losses of the loser are necessary for us to have the benefits of the winner in society. And I think this sort of idea is somewhat dangerous, because it reminded me of the idea of the unfair. When people say the world is unfair, they often always mean that as a negative quality of the world, right? Well, that's what we think anyway. But whenever something is unfair, you have to remember that someone is being privileged as well as someone being maligned by it, or being like pushed down by it. So to say in and of itself that the world is unfair doesn't really have necessarily the prescription that you think it has, because they might say the world is unfair and this might be a good thing. And often when people are in favor of the world being unfair, or if people are ambivalent or don't really care about the world being unfair, it's often that they are the privileged part of the world which is feeling the unfairness, so they are positively affected by the unfairness of the world, so they would not go against it, if that makes sense. So that's the analysis of chapter 4. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the chapter 5 analysis.